it is my very great pleasure to introduce this panel, which is Querying Digital Heritage. And our first presenter is Kavitha. So Kavitha's research examines translated transgender novels by applying digital humanities method. This research particularly investigates the novels translated from Tamil to English. In doing so, she attempts to explore how the emotions of transgender translations from source language to target language. She tries to explore with word-to-word and sentence-to-sentence structure an experience of oppression and marginalization of the transgender community in Indian social media. So I will pass it over to Kavitha now, and hope everyone is as fascinated as I am.
Thank you so much for introducing me, Rianna. I hope I will share my slide. Is it visible?
Not just yet.
Is it visible, Rianna?
No, I can't see it. Yes, we can see it now.
Thank you so much. Here I am going to present my paper titled as Transgender and Representation and Understanding of Misunderstanding on Social Media. In my presentation, I will explore the representation of trans women community on social media such as Facebook and YouTube in India, particularly Tamil Nadu. Transsexuality in India has been gaining much attention and media coverage in the past few years. But social media as a tool used to push them back and harm trans women community with mistaken identity. And unfortunately, it is being used negatively for them. Digital culture has a greater impact on the daily lives of people, and it has greatly influenced and changed the day-to-day activities of the people. I analyzed YouTube and Facebook to examine the representation of the trans women community on social media using qualitative and computational method. I also interviewed a few NGOs such as Priya Babu is the director of Transgender Resource Center, trans writer, activist, documentary filmmaker, researcher in transgender community issues, e-trans news editor. Then Saranya is a joint secretary of Transgender Welfare Organization in Salem and others. Jiva is the founder and director of managing trustee of Transgender Rights Association in Chennai. I asked further questions in my research. My first question is, how is social media employed to represent Indian transgender community? My second question is, how is transgender community oppressed and marginalized on social media? My third question is, can we use social media as a potential tool for transgender activism in India? As Indian trans women community has always been oppressed by heterosexual people, so they are oppressed on digital media too. Significantly, social media has been stuffed with a more negative impact on social women. Um, on trans women. And their discrimination because of their false representation, such as aggressive beggar, violent sex worker, child abductor. Their representation makes us to confirm their false identity. There is a discrimination and marginalization filled in it against trans women. They are consciously or unconsciously creating transphobia through digital culture. I briefly give summary of the harassment which is happening in Indian queer and transgender communities on the social media. For the study, I employ Python to scrap Facebook post and YouTube title. I also used Python for topic modeling terms. There I find little difficulties. When I try to scrap topic terms from Facebook, because it's more private contents, whereas YouTube is more public platform where we can have easy access. So I scrapped public trans women community forums such as NGOs. Therefore, to understand transgender harassment and different abuses, I analyzed various posts and comments from Facebook. I took interview with a transgender activist to know different layers of oppression against trans women. And particularly, I discussed about their personal experience which they faced in private platform, especially Facebook. I have done an experiment on online survey by analyzing 350 YouTube videos, which I extracted using keywords such as transgenders in India. And 1,500 transgenders Facebook post for topic terms to understand the present condition of Indian transgender on social media. The visual description creates a clear analysis of YouTube topic modeling. Each pack of words creates a clear idea of trans women and harassment. As we can see, YouTube topic modeling, maximum of words following negative influence. And there is a positive influence also, such as achieve would indicate achievement of first trans women as a nurse, and trans women community has a little comfortable zone in Kerala. The personification of trans women, Miss India, are related. They are progressing as heterosexuality. But in the same word cloud, the word night life indicates trans women another dark side as a street walker. Here we can identify how unfavorable effort dominating beneficial effort. Transgender, train, railway, fight, attack, thrash, conflict, sex, money, passenger, kidnap, night are the semantic words that are repeated in the word cloud. It brings trans women characteristics in social media as aggressive train wrecker, violent sex worker, child kidnapper. However, the primary issues of excuse me. However, the primary issues of Indian trans women community, such as honor killing, education, healthcare, and financial support, etc., are still absent in the digital space, which demand attention for the development of transgender community. The identity of trans women and their sexuality are abused in all the public places, which include digital culture. First, people are abusing their gender identity following their sexual or physical, verbal, emotional, and economical abuses. The president abuses are connected with one another. The YouTube topic terms such as conflict, thrash, attack, fight are attempts to explain verbal abuse. It indicates the controversy between trans women and sexuality people. I manually analyzed Facebook and YouTube comments. There I can identify many verbal abuse words such as potai, mean effeminate boy, pondan, aravani, ni pombalaya, mean are you female, etc. The other media such as film, for example, the most films indicates trans women as sexually addicted people, prostitute and played in negative roles. They also create a new words to ridicule trans women community. For example, in the Kattaboman Tamil film, comedy actor Kaundamani giving job opportunity to the young beautiful women with the flirting. When trans women asking job opportunity, he says நீங்க பண்ணிட்டாலும் that mean even if you're completed. There are so many hidden meanings such as your work won't be perfect, I'm not ready to I'm not interested to make love with you, you're not equal to us. Additionally, I also addressed whether trans women have filed any cases against verbal abuse on digital media. Implicit and explicit harassments on Facebook and YouTube occur in the comment section and inbox. Of what it shows is that trans men are facing identity, sexual, verbal, emotional, and economical abuses. Here we can we can understand that how trans women are abusing emotionally and economically. Priya Babu says, in online scenario, trans women are harassed emotionally and economically, such as when trans women are on social media, Some men send messages as, "Hi, you're so beautiful, you're like a woman. Why are you not sending me a message? I'm respecting trans women." When trans women reply to him, he will try to make her emotionally weak with words of love and care, for which she is longing for their family and life partners. Finally, he is cheating money from her. When I interviewed Priya Babu, Saranya, Jiva, and a few trans women, their experience in social media is similar, even when they're working in a respectable position. Transgender discrimination on Facebook. The vote in the vote cloud, the votes like discuss, page, help, join, Facebook, love, protest, call, support, interested, talk, give, voice, indicate a positive side, which shows that they are developing in different sectors, and most important, that their gender is coming out from their earlier difficulties. The following words, suicide, kill, staggering, demonstrate painful condition in their life. The word kill, it may indicate the honor killing directly or indirectly to give voice for their protest in the society as well as social media. The transgenders also discussed social media about their rights to receive a voter or driving license to become a citizens of this country, etc. WhatsApp, talk, help are the words which reveal the importance of NGO people who try to help this community physically as well as mentally. Here we can understand that particular word, financial support, job, education related words are lacking. Another important observation is that most of the trans women are not active in their NGO Facebook pages compared to their personal Facebook pages. It shows the lack of involvement due to the dearth of cognizance of how we can employ social media as an effective tool to bring a conversation and about the issues of trans women community in India. Overall, YouTube title and Facebook post topic modeling prove that there is no much contribution about honor killing, education, financial support, job opportunities in Indian social media. And honor killing or shame killing is widely associated with the two different communities, marital or premarital, in the belief of shame and dishonor upon the family members and communities. And only a few know there is a honor killing in trans community, and there is no information about honor killing against transgender in Indian social media. It doesn't mean killing in the hands of parents or family members only. They are stimulating to attempt suicide or kill in the society hand. In the last 5 years, more than 187 caste-based honor killing have happened in Indian society and discussed in Indian social media. In Tamil film Pavakadagal, that means sin stories. In Tangame, verbal, emotional, and economical harassment against trans women, and trans women parents and village people not helped when a few men sexually abused and finally murdered. They allowed trans women to die in the hands of a few men. The reason is she's a trans woman. The same kind of situation is the same kind of situation trans women is facing in reality also. But one case is not discussed in the society and social media, that how society makes sure about their honor killing as a third leading case of suicide. They justify it as failed during their higher secondary exams, stomach pain, abuses from a teacher, depression, love failure, hopeless frustration, and so on. Particularly 15 to 24 years old gender non-conformed children are facing these problems. Compared to women, there is a harassment against trans women in the public and private space. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, the number of cyber crimes has increased by 63.5 in the year 2019 compared to 2008. The term of gender-based recognized harassment that is predicted on perceived only male and female gender identity, and they leave trans women and transgender. The NCRP specifically focuses on the larger framework of gender-based discrimination and hatred, particularly against women, children, child pornography, child sex abuse material, and online content pertaining to rapes and gang rapes. There is no harassment against transgender and trans women complaints and registered on the report and converted into FIR. NCRP should focus the trans women harassment on social media as they harassing online more than women physically, sexually, verbally, and verbally, emotionally, and economically. The government should remove illegal and unlawful discrimination against trans women on the social media. Here I conclude my point. However, we can use social media as a potential tool like education for trans women, education for cisgender about trans women, financial support, employment. There are activities in social media, but not much active and sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavitha. That was really, really impressive and definitely a topic that I wish I knew more about. Does anybody have any questions? We use the hands up function, and if you can't, you can just write it in the chat and I can read it out. Yes, very much round of applause. Anyone want to get the ball rolling? Debs.
Hi, this is very greedy of me to take the first question. Thank you for an extraordinarily rich presentation. I wanted to ask about, I suppose, a similarity between analog meetings and communities, which were sort of spaces of solidarity, which were very often closed and exclusive in order to ensure certain support and protect participants from abuse. And I wondered if you found in your studies of social media groups whether similar things are happening, and apologies if I missed this, whether on the one hand you have sort of open fora on Facebook, which are spaces of solidarity, but also leave the participants open to the kind of deceptive interactions or just straightforward abuse. But are there also exclusive digital fora that allow trans women to speak sort of only to each other?
Kavitha, did you?
Yeah, your voice is breaking. Can you make simplify within one sentence? Anyone?
Yes, apologies. Are there online groups for trans women that are exclusive and protected only for trans participants?
So sorry, I couldn't hear the voice. Anyone can send the message. I'm extremely sorry for that.
Kavitha, can you hear me? So
can you send me a question, please?
Yeah, so Debs is asking if there's any Facebook groups that are designed to help trans women interact and is protected. It's in the chat as well.
Yeah. In Facebook pages, there are so many NGO Facebook pages in India, but trans women are not active in public in NGO Facebook pages in compared to their compared to their private Facebook pages.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question? Maybe it's best to type it out. No? I do have a question, and I will say it and then I will type it. Obviously, your research focuses on trans women. Do trans men face the same sort of online abuse on social media, or is it more directed at trans women? So. I typed it in the chat in case you couldn't hear me, but that's my question.
In my point of view, there are so many NGO Facebook pages for trans women, but for trans women, trans men, only a few Facebook pages. As I told about trans women. Trans women and trans women, they are not much active in NGO Facebook pages. They discussed about they're just applying their profile photos, but no, they're not seriously discussing about their financial support, education, and their healthcare, like that. That is my point.
Thank you. Amy's written a question as well. Is the government in India proposing any measures to combat transphobic abuse on social media? Kavitha? Is the Indian government proposing measures to combat transphobic abuse on social media?
Government is um, uh, they are trying to help, but not much effective in India.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I think we'll move on, and if anyone has any other questions for Kavitha, we can come back to them at the end. But thank you so much. I think that it's a really interesting topic and definitely needs more attention paid to it. So up next we have Subhanjali and Harsha. So Subhanjali Saraswati is a gender activist who actively advocates for equity-based gender rights, especially on social media. She curates Feminism for Everybody and is currently a second-year student of an integrated Masters in Political Science at the University of Hyderabad. Her research interest includes political philosophy, gender theory, digital humanities and public policy. Harsha Lal is currently doing her Masters in Sociology from the University of Hyderabad. Her research interests include queer theory, gender and sexuality, gerontology, disability studies, family and kinship. She is currently doing her dissertation on the experiences of child-free individuals with a special focus on non-normative mothering and alternative forms of mothering. So can I invite Subhanjali and Harsha to put their presentation up and we can get started with that?
Thank you, Rianna. Thank you, Rianna. I will just share my slides in a second. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you. So our topic for presentation is Cultivating Queer Consciousness in Camera. It focuses on the idea of queer and how it has grown to be a consciousness, thought, and it's as a realization. The entire analysis is based on photographs and visual media through Instagram. Just a second. Excuse me. Harsha will take over from now.
Thank you, Subhanjali. So consciousness is what makes it count as experiences. So thus, pure consciousness arises out of the conscious experience of sexuality. So then it comes, what do you mean by queer? Queer is an umbrella term that is used to describe individuals who do not fall under the heteronormative order and doesn't conform to the biological dichotomy of male and female. One's consciousness doesn't merely arise from the ordinary experiences, but is also informed through philosophical choices and belief systems. Pure consciousness is not predetermined, but rather is resultant of the choices that we make.
So, for furthering the idea of queer consciousness, the methodology that we have used is digital ethnography, and Instagram has been used as a site for explorations. And we have covered over 20 pages, Instagram pages with over 100 posts each for understanding the idea of how it is propagated. And we have also explored a couple of photography exhibition-based series wherein the idea of queer consciousness has evolved. The framework that we have used for this project is queer theory and intersectionality.
Art in recent times has not just been used as a form of aesthetics, but it's also used to invoke sentiment as a form, and also as a form of resistance. And visual activism basically is activism broadly based upon visual media. And the everyday realities of your community is portrayed through their social media interactions and their posts, and we have tried to analyze those. And these art forms, if we can call it art forms, are don't necessarily fall within the formal institution of art, but they do have a significant epistemological contribution to the queer identity.
So this is an example of one of the photography series that we had covered. It's titled Kothis, Hijras, Giryas, and Others. All the three terms are technically used to refer to transgenders. And as we can see in the picture, heteronormative forms of dressing have been employed, although the stance and the position that the models have taken, they are transgender. You can't call them transgender models because transgenders in India aren't often accepted as models, but they are simply people from the streets dressed up so as to try and fit into the heteronormative structures that are present today. This second series, as you can see, the first picture on the left side is titled Full Moon on a Dark Night. It's by a photographer named Soumya Shankar Bose, taken in 2015. And the second picture that you see on the right is an Instagram post from 2019 that we had picked out from one of the pages while exploring. As you can see in both the pictures, it depicts a male gendered person, but you can't always say that. But yeah, both of them are male genders, but they have flowers on their head. Flowers in India especially are signifiers of femininity and feminine values, which, while if you're considering the idea of gender performance, is looked down upon according to the heteronormative gender binary structures. And these images are placed so as to counter the common idea that that is placed upon. The next one is to portray the transphobia that exists across social media. This is one of the trans activists from India who posts what kind of DMs she gets for. She's a doctor, but even then, she is sexualized for changing her gender. And while one tries and discovers one's identity is often not the same as the sex with the sex that they were born with, one often starts loathing their own bodies. And while you can pause and reflect, like as she says in the caption that you had put with the picture, I have to pause and reflect. You can pause and reflect, but yeah, there's a point of time when one starts questioning themselves, okay, are we in the right? Is the heteronormative structure the correct thing? So the entire queer theory that has come up in the few decades and the century before, and even before that, like, it has often been covered up because people are not open to accepting the ideas. This is another image that we came across titled Young Subculture. Again, the stockings adorned by the model in the picture is to oppose the idea of gender binary. While most of these people are actively vocal on social media, they are often not so in their daily lives because of the lashback that they face. So while we were analyzing all the Instagram channels, we had come across the common points of starting from cross-dressing to explicit display of public display of affection. Artistic forms of resistance are have a larger foreground, starting from poetry, art, and drama, so as to so that they aren't exactly openly. It's like their way of accepting the idea of queer and being consciously aware of what they are, despite facing injustice and obstruction to be themselves. And this is pictures of the pride parades that were that have been posted on Instagram that we came across. Harsha
Yeah.
will take it forward.
So the current work has focused mainly on the visibility of the members of the LGBTQIA plus, their lives, culture, and community, and how they have used art, technology, and content creation effectively to carry forward the efforts of pioneer queer activists. So their work, in a sense, subverts the established narratives that we have been taught and that is prevailing in our society, with a counter and more inclusive narrative of the lived experiences and possible realities of queer individuals. The cyberspace is increasingly becoming a vital part of our social experience. And especially with the pandemic, all of our interactions have been transposed into the virtual, visual area. And so thus we can see a discernible reappropriation of the spaces, especially from the marginal community as of now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? There's, again, not many in the chat, but does anyone want to put their hand up and ask? Debs again.
Sorry, seeing as how there's a quiet moment. Thank you, that was really fascinating. One of the things that struck me was the question of language, the way in which terms are being used, both in terms of sort of tagging as insults, as terms orientated as sort of positive descriptions, are being drawn from different languages, both from English and different Indian languages. And I was wondering, is that something that you've looked at, the way in which a set of terms has arisen, both positively and negatively, to describe in India the trans experience as it's being reframed in the last few years on social media?
To answer your question, Debs, the trans experience in India has mostly been negative, because considering how staunch and patriarchal the system out here is, it is often such that let alone trans people, even women have issues being themselves, even men have issues being themselves. It's just not a question of simple transgenders or simple masculinity or femininity ideals. It's about an entire spectrum of insults, and the way it is normalized to a point that people use it in their daily languages. As you were saying, Indian languages are often very sexist, so there are many slangs that are used in a daily life, but because they have been used so much, people consider that they have lost their extreme immediate negative connotations that they have. However, while they are, they still hit people if they are used against. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. Does your answer suggest that are misogynistic terms from different languages being sort of repurposed to be used in transphobic languages, as it were?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's
That is
really
also the case.
Thank you, Debs. Does anyone else have a question? While people are thinking about it, I actually have one. My question is, do you think that social media can help reclaim these languages? And because obviously, you know, within England or within English, I should say the UK, queer was a pejorative term at one point, and now it has been repurposed, and we now use it in, I would argue, a more positive way. Do you think social media can do the same for these slang terms, or should they be?
I do not believe the slang terms themselves can be changed because of the extreme derogatory connotation they have. It's not just the connotation they have, it's the slang terms that are there in Indian languages are usually a sentence or a phrase that actively refer to sexualized things. So it cannot directly be changed. However, social media is a space that exists. It can be reclaimed and repurposed to suit all kinds of people, and although we are trying to do so slowly, it's often that activists and many Indian pages are, for instance, the page that I run, I'm usually I usually face a lot of DMs with why am I doing this? If I'm actually a feminist, if things actually matter to me, and then there are people who send in a variety of sexualized images directly into the DMs without consent, and the amount of hatred that is there on this is hard to counter. But yeah, since so many pages still do exist and still do carry on their work, I believe it is possible at some point of time.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, because obviously social media can be used for good, but it can also be used for bad, because people, if they are anonymous, then they feel like they can say whatever they want. They can send pictures without consent. So that must be quite difficult for you in your work. Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh, Amy's got a question. In the UK sections of the LGBT community, where they have reclaimed abusive terms for their own to use as badges of pride, the trans community hasn't yet done this. Is this a phenomenon seen in Indian society?
There's a slight attempt to regain the abusive terms, but since the larger population uses it towards the terms being used in an abusive connotation, it hasn't been done that widely in India.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that, you know, what you're doing is really, I mean, everything is really important in this panel to me and my research, but I think that this is really fascinating. And will be followed up by one of our own. So next up we have Bethany Frost, who is studying for an MA in History at Lancaster University. Her research focuses on social and cultural contemporary history, especially LGBTQ+ activism in the late 20th century. She particularly enjoys using interdisciplinary approaches to explore marginalised historical narratives, and is currently searching the transatlantic relationship between branches of the ACT UP organisation. So if I could ask Bethany to start presenting.
Rianna, can you see the
Yes,
slides?
perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi everybody, thank you for being here. What I'm going to be talking to you about is the Heritage Project that was run by Queer Britain on Twitter last summer as a means for people to keep engaging with heritage during lockdown, and what we can take from this regarding the overlapping nature of queer heritage and digital heritage. Established in 2018, Queer Britain is a charity that is working to open the first museum in the UK that would solely be about the lives, history and culture of LGBTQ+ people. The proposed opening date was in 2021, but I think it's quite possible there's been a bit of a delay there. Whilst working on this, they've held smaller events and exhibitions, but like the rest of us, had to make some adjustments when the pandemic struck. In May, they launched an 8-week project, the Lockdown Hunt, on Twitter, in which they encouraged Twitter users to find items from around their homes that constituted a personal or communal queer history, and to share photographs of them using the hashtag #QBLockdownHunt. As well as this, they live-streamed interviews with activists and museum volunteers where they discussed their own items. It's these interviews that I'm going to be focusing on because they highlight some of the interesting intersections of queer and digital heritage. On their website, this was clearly described as a project rather than an attempted recreation or digitization of a museum, although a sign in the background of some of the videos reads #MuseumFromHome, making it clear that they were attempting to create something akin to a museum. However, I think that considering it as an alternative museum or an almost museum allows for a more nuanced exploration. There's a growing literature on almost museums and alternative archives, and the liminality of these concepts is where I think the Lockdown Hunt fits the most comfortably. The Lockdown Hunt itself was a scavenger hunt of sorts. A category of artifacts was chosen each week for people to search their homes for, and these were mostly ephemera, so posters, flyers, badges, t-shirts, but also included music and other art forms. This entire conceit perfectly demonstrates what Halberstam calls a scavenger methodology, which is prevalent in the researching and writing of marginalized histories, both in terms of having to combine different methods of collection and interpretation, but also the literal experience of gathering source material for subjects who have been traditionally excluded from mainstream history. Queer Britain's project has the benefit of being virtual, therefore much easier to be shared widely and be participated in from any location, which underlines the importance of digital methods to queer heritage. Though in some places, in pre-pandemic times, the queer community exists as an in-person community kind of way, for many LGBTQ+ people that wasn't and isn't a possibility, for reasons of safety and stigma, or simply living too far away from hubs of queer activity. Digital spaces remove many of these barriers. Of course, internet access still isn't completely widespread, and some may face government-imposed and household-imposed censorship on what they are able to access on the internet. But for the most part, social media erases the need for geographical proximity to engage in LGBTQ+ culture and heritage, and gives queer people the space to embrace their identity in a way they are not always able to in quotidian life. As well as a descriptive identity, queer should be understood as a broader academic framework of questioning and analysis. Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick notes that queer can have a multitude of meanings, always depending on the individual, which itself represents what she describes as the open mesh of possibilities, gaps, overlaps, dissonances and resonances, lapses and excesses of meaning, when the constituent elements of anyone's gender, of anyone's sexuality, aren't made or can't be made to signify monolithically. That is to say, this queer museum or heritage project is queer not just in the displaying of LGBTQ+ stories, but in a break with conventions of collection and curation. There is growing scholarship exploring the interconnectedness of queer and digital heritage. H.N. Lukes and David J. Kim argue that the digital and the queer are alike and intertwined in their critique of conventional research methodologies and brick-and-mortar containments of culture and history. Centuries of oppression have resulted in very little queer history being included in mainstream historical narratives. In the UK, legislation such as Section 28 had an incredibly damaging impact on the queer community in many ways, and made it much more difficult for queer heritage to exist in public spaces. As part of the rise of history from below that began in the 1960s, LGBTQ+ people actively preserved their own history, knowing that no one else would do it for them. This is something that Stonewall activist and current Queer Britain trustee Lisa Power acknowledges in her interview when she reveals a limited edition and numbered t-shirt from a fundraising campaign in the early days of Stonewall. All these years later, she still owns the very first shirt from the collection. but even now hasn't opened it because she anticipated, or perhaps hoped, that it might become a collector's item in the future. The actual format of these interviews reveals the heart of the project, perhaps unintentionally. The guests filmed themselves, usually through a webcam, and held the items they were discussing up to their camera to display them to the interviewer and the audience. This footage was shown on a screen next to the interviewer, Dan Vo, who himself was filmed on a camera, and this was live streamed through Periscope and embedded in a tweet. Which sounds a little convoluted, but as you can see, it worked quite well. As far as I've been able to tell, there is no explicit explanation for this setup, as opposed to a Zoom broadcast or a Teams meeting, but I would assume it is for wider accessibility. You don't even need a Twitter account to view the tweets containing the videos, and there are direct links to them from the Queer Britain website, so there's no need to scroll back for months and months and months. It makes it more accessible for a longer period of time. They will be available to view for as long as Queer Britain want to keep them up, or as long as Twitter exists, which does then reveal one of the potential challenges for social media-based heritage. There is a dependency on the platform to function well and have good terms of service, especially in light of YouTube algorithms appearing to bury queer content or incorrectly flag it as sensitive material. Whilst digital spaces reveal many possibilities for queer heritage, they can unfortunately be susceptible to human prejudice. In this setup, there is inevitably a sacrifice in the quality of the video image. Having one screen filtered through another is always going to decrease the quality a little. And when the interviewees hold their items up to the camera, you don't get a particularly high quality view. There is no magical HD 360-degree view like you can find on some museums' websites. But as you can see here, it's quite hard to make out any of the detail on the flyer that Matty Artemis is holding up beyond Sydney Street Cafe. So all the details have to be verbally given by the guest. Although this is a consequence of the pandemic, and it remains to be seen what approaches Queer Britain will take in displaying items in the eventual physical museum, what I think this captures is that this heritage project places greater value in the stories surrounding the objects, rather than their materiality. In some cases, the significance of an artifact is only revealed through the memories and emotional attachment the owner has to it, something that is often lost to time in conventional curation. But the nature of this project allows queer people to stake out their own place in history. In another interview, Lisa Power jokingly declares herself to be a historical artifact in my own right, in response to Dan Vo listing her credentials in LGBTQ+ movements over the last few decades. And she's clearly not making a claim to self-importance, but the phrase really embodies the idea of objects being a conduit for stories and experiences to be told. This is similar to what Robert Mills describes as a movement away from the object-centred to experience-centred understandings that is sometimes found in queer exhibitions and museums. Furthermore, the layered screen format also results in an interesting viewing experience because Dan Vo alternates between looking directly at the camera and towards the screen of the interviewee, creating the illusion for the viewer of being included in the conversation. Mills suggests that when there is a departure from the objective narratorial voice of museum authority, museum visitors are fully implicated in the interpretive process. This isn't entirely the case here. The inability to engage in any detail with the artifacts renders the viewer more dependent on the description and interpretation given by the owner. And despite these interviews being live events, there was not any direct audience interaction or question and answer section. This is a result of the limitations of the format, I think, rather than any particular refusal to engage. And the conversational nature of Twitter allows for interactions afterwards. During the interviews, there was frequently a camaraderie between Dan Vo and the guest, which gave the project an immediate warmth and emotional accessibility, something that can be more difficult to achieve in a non-digital museum space. To conclude, the heart of Queer Britain's lockdown hunt is that the personal stories and memories of LGBTQ+ people are integral to a queer heritage, and that social media is a brilliant tool to collect them directly. In some ways, it can also be considered as an oral testimony project. This almost museum provides viewers with an expert insight into queer history without having to leave their home. And not only is it accessible by everyone with an internet connection, but was supported by active community collaboration, a real scavenger methodology. It remains to be seen what the physical museum will be like, but hopefully the seeming success of the lockdown hunt will encourage the further incorporation of digital methods of heritage. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Bethany. That was really, really amazing. And I love the pictures. They were very, very colourful. Oh, we already have a question off Max. What aspects of the Queer Britain project do you think worked best and in turn can be utilised by further LGBTQ+ and queer-based projects?
Wow. I think what really sticks out is the real community nature of it. So the Queer Britain Twitter account would frequently retweet and engage with and reply to and like any, well, not any, but like all the serious posts that people like tweeted with the hashtag and their own artifacts. So it really created a sense of not just discussing the queer community, but creating a queer community in that space itself. I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Does anybody else have a question that they want to ask Bethany? If not, I'm going to steal it. Sorry. So when you were talking about this, it gave me it made me think of the Her Story archives that exist for queer women in, I want to say New York, America. It's New York. And the fact that they basically create a living space where you can touch the ephemera and you can kind of get involved, and it's not like a traditional museum space. When you think about how Queer Britain could go ahead with a physical space, do you think of it more as like a traditional museum or more like the Her Story archives or somewhere in between?
I mean, I have no idea, but I would guess maybe that it would be somewhere in between. Because in one of the other interviews, so Dan Vo, the interviewer, also does LGBTQ tours around the V&A Museum, and one of the people he was interviewing had been on a tour with him, and he made a joke about how he'd had to tell this guest to stop touching the artifacts because you can't do that in the V&A. But it was a very kind of lighthearted, joking kind of comment, so it wouldn't surprise me if they did have a more kind of tactile approach.
Yeah, because it's moving, like you were saying, moving from the object to the experience. And obviously a traditional museum space doesn't offer an experience based, it offers object based. So it's quite interesting how they're going to get around that. I mean, I have no idea. I was just wondering, like, if you could do it, how would you do it? But I think that you kind of answered that already. Does anybody else have a question? Someone's going to have to ask one, otherwise I'll keep asking them. Debs?
Like a well-run seminar. I was wondering if any thought had been given to the question of longevity. Physical museums, for all their disadvantages, have that robustness, material robustness. So is there a digital archiving project going on hand in hand with this?
Not as far as I know, but it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of, in light of the success of this project, they did try to build something in that wake, because whilst this project has been really good for the kind of stories and experience-based archiving, obviously the artifacts themselves can't really be archived or preserved in the kind of way we'd hope. So maybe if they have like more funding, it's something they would look into further.
Yeah, and kind of Amy's got an observation. Can the project material be curated and made available via other channels, i.e. YouTube? Oh, someone else got their hand up, but we'll deal with Amy first.
Yeah, I assume it could do. As far as I know, it isn't, but there are links to the individual videos through the website, so it's not like you have to go deep diving for it. But yeah, I think using YouTube would be a really great way to kind of collect it all in one place and expand it, because the interviews themselves were only typically about 15 minutes. So like YouTube can obviously handle much longer videos than that. So it could be a good opportunity for them going forward.
Perfect. Okay, so Jane's got her hand up.
Hi. Yes, I'm really enjoying all the sessions, and it's very late at night, so I hope where I am. So I hope this makes sense. One of the things that struck me in your description of this fabulous project activism form of museum was the reliance. It kind of brought home to me just how much of our lives, and this is also with the two papers from India, were the reliance on these corporate giants, these private platforms, and how precarious, that's another level of precarity. And I wondered if something like Queer Britain is thinking about that, or in terms of their efforts, apart from a physical museum. I don't know. I just wondered if it had factored in their thinking, the elaborate way in which they've managed to encourage accessibility of the Twitter thing. But it could all come crashing down in 10 years, or it could all be bought up by somebody from another place and made into something else.
Yeah.
I just wondered, it was just like, I'm sitting here kind of thinking, oh shit, anyway.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I wish I had a great answer to that, but I think it's a really important consideration that as accessible as social media is, it is like we kind of often forget how reliant it is on companies, usually in Silicon Valley. And yeah, so I would hope that they've got their own kind of backup storage, and they could, they have a website, so they could well expand it and kind of carve out their own like space on the internet that isn't dependent on external organizations. But that's something that really needs to be considered in these kinds of projects.
We use these corporate entities as public spaces. Yeah, we kind of forget. Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for the other two papers too. They've been worth me staying up on a Friday night.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that the kind of these places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they give queer communities a kind of way to interact online, but at the same time they come with some issues. And kind of bringing back to that, Amy's got a question. I think it's for Kavitha, Subhanjali, and Harsha, which is, were the projects subject to any forms of trolling or abuse, and if so, how was it counted? So can I invite them to come back? Maybe all the presenters can have their cameras on? Yes, no, maybe?
Do you want me to answer that whilst people are sorting with their cameras? Yeah. There wasn't any kind of glaringly obvious trolling or abuse, although I'm sure, like, in the replies to lots of the tweets, there probably were some nasty comments, but it didn't seem to overwhelm the project. And I don't know if that's the case of really good moderation or, like, well, as I say good moderation, a good relationship with Twitter moderating that, because obviously Twitter are the people who are ultimately responsible for deleting hateful content on its platform. So I didn't see much of it, which is a really positive sign, but knowing what we all know about the internet, I'm sure it was there.
Yeah, definitely. Subhanjali, are you still with us?
So this is Harsha, so maybe I can take this one.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, but I think, like, to what the previous presenter has said, like, many of the Instagram accounts, especially, they have been flooded, and even the comment section have been flooded with a lot of really bad derogatory terms and trolling, and even their pictures have been repurposed to make memes out of them, and in a very derogatory manner. So I think maybe, like you said, it's a better moderation of the content that's there, but the things that we have seen, maybe I don't know if it's about the Indian society and their worldview. But yeah, we have seen a more negative, like, it's not to say that there are many allies and they have been, trying to, how do you say, shadow those negative comments. But, there are many negative comments and slurs, trolling that happens to them. But I think it's the digital space for them has given them the platform to take those negative comments itself and reappropriate it and use it in a positive manner and reclaim their identity and pride in their identity.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Debs has got another question. Do you want to say it out loud, Debs?
I was just thinking about the relative porosity that strikes me, I think, of queer experience, in the sense that the influence of US movements in the 70s and 80s had on British movements. And the internet, I'm assuming, amplifies that porosity in some ways. And I suppose this is actually a similar question to the one I asked earlier about language, in the way in which you get this kind of merging together of Anglophonic and Indian language terms in completely new ways to address new articulations of identities and new sort of expressions of hatefulness. So I was just wondering, I mean, in terms of the Queer Britain project and others, the way in which you see those boundaries being both kind of negated, but also perhaps asserted. It's quite a commenty question, sorry.
I was just thinking, good luck answering that.
Well, obviously, I guess the first thing that you notice about Queer Britain is that it's Queer Britain, which suggests that it's entirely focused on British queerness and history. But I get the impression that the name comes more from the fact it's in Britain rather than that it's exclusively British, because quite a few of the guests had like ephemera and badges and T-shirts from Pride marches all over the world, and people who were involved with it were not. I mean, it seemed like they weren't just British. So although I think it probably does take a very British model of queerness and activism, it's quite expansive in its reach, if that kind of answers your question.
I'd take silence as yes. In saying that, with the kind of with the kind of the Queer Britain thing, do you think that maybe it erases the geographical differences? Because obviously to be queer in South Wales is not the same to be queer in London to Newcastle to Edinburgh. So, was there a sense of regional difference within Britain itself, or was it more kind of as a community? Was it quite holistic?
I think there was. I did get a bit of a sense of it being a little bit London-centric, and I think part of that is because I think the museum's set to, I think it's South Bank. They're looking at to have a museum, but it will be in London, and a lot of the people who are involved with it are based in London, because that's where a lot of both museum and queer jobs and opportunities are. And so they all kind of, because a lot of them knew each other, there was a big kind of focus on London, but they did have interviews with people from definitely across the UK, not obviously, it wasn't completely regionalised, but it wasn't completely not.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you mean. London steals all the best museums, I think. Shammu's got a question for Kavitha. Kavitha, are you still with us? I know we were having some tech issues. Kavitha? Shammu? Got your hand up?
Hello. Hi.
Hiya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
Yeah. Actually, the question is, I think it's not for Kavitha, but anyone can answer to my question. I would be happy. So, since Kavitha mentioned that there is no proper law or rules against the online harassment of transgenders in India, so I wonder the British government's measurements and rules against online harassments of transgenders. So maybe this kind of comparative study would help researchers to know better about the countries, how they curb the online harassments against transgender.
I don't know if anyone wants to take that. I mean, I think that a comparative approach would be excellent, because I know that I'm not alone in saying that the anti-trans sentiment has definitely spiked in Britain over the last couple of years, much to our dismay, and that's due to a number of factors. And I think that there is a lot of online hate against transgender people. So, Bethany, do you want to kind of expand or agree? Or
Yeah, no, I agree completely with what you said, and it doesn't look like the government's doing much. I mean, I think there's probably some degree of hate speech laws do cover it to an extent, but I don't get the impression that it's a priority of the government, unfortunately. But yeah, I think a comparative study would be fantastic.
Great, thank you.
just to kind of like move it on to maybe a more informal discussion, if anyone wants to kind of have a comment, and we can just have like something a little bit less Q&A. Does anybody have a comment they want to make out loud? No? Any other questions or anything? I do love some awkward silence. Okay, so I just want to say thank you again to all our wonderful presenters. Obviously, this has been wonderful. Debs is coming into the rescue. So, Debs, is there something you want to say?
Well, very quickly then, because obviously we can wrap up. But I was wondering about the class dynamic, and this is a question I think if Harsha, if you can hear, and Kavitha, and also for Bethany, so if it's to everyone. I mean, do you find there's a certain a sort of filtering of participation by looking at fora like Instagram, or even compared to Twitter and Facebook? Do you get a sense of socioeconomic demographic, whether that's in India or in Britain, by looking at those different platforms, or even whether people are on those platforms or not? Is Instagram, for example, associated with a different demographic than Facebook?
Harsha, do you want to go first, or?
So I think more than class, I'd say in India, we can see more of a caste-based, filtering that happens. And also digital divide is a thing in India. The pandemic, we can see, those who have the, luxury to be on Instagram and, be vocal about and create content, because content creation is a big, it's a full-time job, you could say. So to be a full-time activist or content creator directed for, towards the queer community, it takes a lot of, it does filter out certain sections of the population. And another thing is that especially the visibility that the media provides to certain sections of the society is very pertinent if you look at it closely. And even some of the profiles that we look at, some of them have been educated. They know how to voice their concerns or the problems they have faced, and the power that comes with belonging to a upper caste background does change how they react, how they have put forward their identity on social platforms. And also with regard to language, like I think a couple of questions before, like you could add this to it, because language, like social media, you could say is mostly based in English. So, like you could say like people coming who are not very well versed in English, or who can't appease, to the, because English is the language that gives you wider visibility, like be it anywhere in the world, you could say. So if you are not creating content or not voicing your opinions in English, also I think for the younger population, English language has given a vocabulary to them that makes them better, you could how you say, better identify with themselves with different sexualities or gender identities. Like as I think Deborah said, like before, in I think ancient India or pre-colonial India, you could say, we had a lot of variations of trans people, but they were not considered as trans. We have other names for them, like such as hijra. So if you look at it from a very surface level, you could say, so are hijras and trans people the same? But when you look at it from a very cultural perspective, they have maybe it will be very how they very subtle, but they do have differences. And so, but the younger population, they have got information and have been identifying themselves, you could say, more with the English vocabulary of gender and sexuality. And so I would say that does, add to it.
Yeah, and I think that you've hit on a really important point there, that age and language can have that sort of impact, because I look at queer magazines from 1990s India, and that's very much a discussion that they're having as well about what the language they're using means. If they talk in English instead of in Tamil and stuff like that, it can be problematic in terms of caste difference. So yeah, I think as well, like, not wishing to call anyone out, but in Britain, Instagram and Snapchat are used by younger people, whereas Twitter is seen to belong to people that might be a little bit older, and Facebook is for the geriatric community now. Sorry guys, no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, Bethany, do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, that was all articulated really well. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a difference in the Queer Britain project. There was a difference in engagement between the interviews and the kind of open access, the open contribution of tweets, in that the interviews were people who Queer Britain either worked in Queer Britain or Queer Britain knew through other kind of community things. So whilst it wasn't a class thing as such, there was an insular nature to it, and that's obviously for kind of practicality reasons. It's a lot easier to have somebody give a talk if you know who they are than just pick someone off the street and hope they're good in front of a camera. Whereas the tweets were I don't know, I guess it's kind of almost a democratizing way of doing it, because anybody can contribute, and there didn't seem to be any kind of, it didn't seem like there was just one particular demographic who was contributing. So it was quite diverse in its reach, or the people who reached out to it, I guess.
In its attraction, yeah.
Yeah,
I suppose that's really nice to hear, because I wasn't anticipating that. Not that I'm very cynical about Britain. Max, you just had your hand up. Is there something you want to comment or question?
Yeah, hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to apologise if anybody hears the world's loudest dryer. It's doing its best. I guess I kind of have a double-sided question, if that's okay. First of all, as we're all very familiar, I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas for the long-term sustainability of projects like this? As programs change and online platforms change, and how do we ensure that we kind of protect all of the work that's already done so we don't lose it? And also, kind of on the back end of that, just on the discussion that was had, what do you think the benefits of going cross-platform for things like this are? Not only for sustainability, but as we talked about, different demographics, obviously different age groups and different people use different platforms, and different countries use different platforms. And I'm just kind of wondering more on the sustainability, really, what you think about that.
Yeah, they're really good points.
Not to put you on the spot.
I mean, I don't know quite what their internal processes are, but I would hope that they have their own kind of this is where I reveal how not great with tech I am sometimes. Some kind of like not hard copies, but kind of their own records of these interviews and tweets that aren't dependent on Twitter existing. And that can be easy to do. As like the video footage they can save, download, and you can screenshot tweets and save the images that people send in. And so that really just depends on them having the impetus to do that. And I guess as technology develops, for that to be kind of stored in ways that last. I have no idea what the tech of the next 15 years is going to look like, but I would hope that they've got the resources to keep up with it. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does, yeah. Sorry.
You've made some really great points, and I don't feel like I have a huge amount to
no,
add
that's
to
okay.
them.
And I know not everybody can sit here and say, the Queer Britain Project will do this. Nobody knows, but it's just kind of like to start a conversation about sustainability, because it's amazing to see this work being done and the work being put in by people and people, crowdsourced participation and user-generated content and all this. And it just, in the back of your mind, there's that creeping digital humanities voice saying, what if Twitter ceased to exist in the morning? What are you going to do? So that's kind of just where I was going with that. But thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I think the question of sustainability is quite an interesting one, because if you kind of look at the other way, stuff like Instagram. So going back to Harsha and Subhanjali, content creation, like you were saying, it's constant. So things slip through the cracks and different things have more currency, I suppose. So like with the Instagram, is it really fast paced, and is everything kind of, I don't know, equally looked at, or are some things more popular than others? Like, what does trans content look like on Instagram?
Could you repeat the question?
I don't really know what the question was, but is there constant content creation by trans people on Instagram, and does it kind of slip through the cracks, I suppose? Does that make sense?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. However, as you said, there's a variety of content that is created. However, the trans content that you say per se that is created, it's often not by trans people themselves, but allies who vouch for them. Because as the earlier discussion had been, there's often a language barrier, and the digital spaces do not entirely cover the transgender spectrum in India, because they have been marginalized in such a great way that having access to basic digital devices is also an issue that is there.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Deb's just got a comment and it distracted me. Yeah. Does anybody else have any comments or any questions that they want to? Oh, Jane?
Sorry, I can't find the chat. I'm using a phone and I can't find the chat button. But I just wanted to point out that there is this crowdsource, or at least not publicly owned, volunteer run, the Wayback Machine, which is an internet archive. I don't know enough about it, but I'm wondering if that should be on kind of digital activists and digital heritage inquiry lists, because potentially that might be one way to do it. And to actually have sections so that you can actually find, okay, I want to look at that in that year. I'm not sure how effective it is at the moment, but that's what do you call it? Open source, yeah. So it might be worth factoring in. I don't know if anybody else has heard anything about it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. And it does, from the little I know about it as well, it does require people to actively log web pages onto it. It's not just an all-seeing thing. So yes, I think activist groups and kind of digital heritage projects really should be utilizing that if they can, and being involved in like I don't know who owns it, but
Well,
yeah,
no one
making
does,
sure
that's
that
the
it's
point.
yeah, and making sure that
It's
it's
open source, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point.
I mean, I think that it's quite interesting because going back to what Max was saying, I occasionally do have a thing like, what happens if the internet just disappears and it's all just gone poofed and all that hard work and stuff? Because I don't know if it's because I'm not as, I don't know, I like to see things. I like to print out newspapers that are my sources and like to look through them, like, because obviously there's all these amazing opportunities for digital archiving and digital histories, but a little part of me is like, I just want to have them in person. I don't know if that's a shared experience, or do other people just really like digital spaces?
I think that's where, like, obviously the benefit of old-timey traditional museums come from, you know. Many countries have their, you know, their national museums, and that houses most of their most precious and kind of important stuff that they want to display, but also keep safe, you know. And obviously there's benefits to that. It's not as easily accessed. You have to physically visit that museum, which obviously they're, you know, everyone loves a good museum, but you can't just, especially during the pandemic, as everyone has said before me, you know, you can just log online and find projects like this. So there's obviously pros and cons, but maybe in the future striving to have a physical museum might kind of cement the work a little bit more. And also that brings more exposure again. But definitely there's a kind of an issue of, you know, what if the internet ceased to exist in the morning? You know, you don't want to lose all of this amazing work just because, you know, it doesn't have the same support from governments that you know, more traditional history does. Yeah,
I mean, do we really need another war museum? I don't think so. Showing my prejudice there against war museums. Subhanjali?
So if for instance, as you said, if the internet ceased to exist, like you said you have newspaper clippings, I have a copy of all the little ideas of what is queer, what is it. Like for instance, like in the recent past, India has become a lot censored, and even the little list of things that we do get censored, and like and it's been quite often that even posts are taken down immediately. Like you were saying, slipping through the cracks. I couldn't get you at that point of time, but I do understand you right now that like because things are censored, they're taken down immediately, and then it's just gone. Like if you have a screenshot of it, it's there in your own personal gallery, but then on the internet itself, well, that's a questionable place.
Yeah, and it's slippery, isn't it? Because you've seen it and it was on the internet, and then poof, it's gone, and you still have proof of it, but it's just intangible. It's difficult to touch, and I think that's why I firmly do not do anything digital. Sorry, guys. But yeah, no, I think that's really, really important. Amy, I don't know if your microphone's working, but as an LGBTQ plus military historian, you know, kind of how do you kind of, whenever I've been to a war museum, they quite definitely don't ever mention queer stuff. So do you want to talk a little bit about it? Just thought I'd invite you in.
Oh gosh. Oh, hang on. Can you hear me? I thought I'd turn the camera on.
Hear you. You're all here.
Hopefully the camera will turn on as well. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think, I mean, speaking as an international military historian, I don't think you can have enough international military history. So kind of that was kind of one point, but that's a very selfish point of view, I guess. I think in terms of our commemoration of military activity and conflict, you know, I'm not what you'd call a tanks and guns person. For me, it's about the people. It's about the popular experience. It's about civilian populations. You know, whether we're talking about, you know, the Blitz in the UK, or we're talking about, you know, the average conscript in the Great War, or civilians in Syria, you know, who've obviously been caught up in a horrendous conflict. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I think it's a fair challenge to say is our coverage of the everyday experience, whether that be civilian or whether that be, you know, serving soldier, airman, sailor, whatever, is very heteronormative. Yeah, I'm kind of struggling to think. Although no, actually, I got a vague memory somewhere. I've been to something that talked about the experience of gay sailors in serving in the Navy and kind of their experience and the sanctions. And I think, you know, there's a whole narrative which is kind of caught up around legalization and decriminalization around kind of people's experience. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I know I'm rambling now, but you know, the kind of telling the stories of serving LGBT service people and the struggles they had and losing their jobs. So, you know, there's a very well-known person who's a former mayor of Manchester who was a serving RAF airman and was forcibly removed from the service. And this is somebody who got, you know, a good conduct medal. He'd saved somebody in a horrendous accident. And I think the government recently made a formal apology to those people, didn't it? And kind of rehabilitated. And now, you know, the services are vigorous participants in pride events up and down the country, which is kind of great. But I think the commemoration of the struggles and involvement of LGBTQ people in conflict rather than kind of individual stories is something that's not really addressed, and I think, you know, should be. I think there's probably, depending on what kind of time horizon you go back on, probably the material wasn't curated at the time because it kind of wasn't a thing. Although, you know, then thinking particularly of digital history, so of oral history, and thinking about, you know, sort of the great conflicts of the 20th century, the time to act is pretty quick while they're still here. So that might be a challenge to oral historians. But anyway, sorry, a bit of a ramble, but I hope those thoughts help.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because obviously you're talking about kind of linking back to how we get hands on this history. And I think that there are issues with censorship as well, that people who did have these experiences were ejected. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't until the 90s until you were allowed to be gay in the army and out. But yeah, I think it ties very nicely into Subhanjali talking about censorship. And I think she's got her hand up, so I'll pass over and see what she has to say.
So what I wasn't quite talking about censorship in just the social media spectrum in general, but in real physical life as well. Like people dress certain ways, people walk certain ways. I do not know how to explain it, but apart from the metropolitan cities, even then there are approximately 50% of the region are such that you won't be comfortable walking alone without having people staring at you, gazing at you, leering at you, like for who you are. And if you're a transgender, people will look away and they won't talk. And transgender community in India is such that they walk on the streets, they ask for money, they dance around, hoping for some kind of a survival benefit. And they are, it is in such extremes that you cannot imagine or compare it to any other place.
Yeah, India is a very specific kind of example of it. Do you want to talk a bit more? Or?
Yeah, I would like to add the fact that it wasn't always like this. Like, it is a contrast to what it always is. Like, there are temples with depictions which look really beautiful and people admire it, people go and pray. However, it's the very same people who pray in these temples who look down upon the transgenders who are walking on the streets, who say they are unnatural. They are the ideas are so ingrained deeply that it's like quite a huge contrast. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to think about, and it's obviously quite distressing Does anybody else have any comments or any questions about anything that we've talked about? I'll give it another couple of seconds for my scary seminar tutor face to make somebody want to talk. But if not, can I just thank all of our presenters again? It's been a really wonderful panel, and thanks to everybody who had a question or a comment or just came to listen. I think that it's been fantastic. We will let you know about recordings, and yes, thank you so much to everyone that's come. We will be in touch about anything further, and hopefully we will see you this afternoon for our second panel, which off the top of my head I can't remember the name of, but it is Cultures Digitised, and I will thankfully not be chairing that one. But yeah, Debs, is there anything you want to say to wrap up? Or
only thank you very much. That was fascinating. Thank you for to everyone for their contribution.